And what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of MLS History Retold on the Designated Players and MLS podcast. Today, these stories are something that live just specifically in the lore relative to their fan bases. First, as the Timbers and Sounders rivalry was halted when the Sounders made the jump to MLS, Portland Timbers fans sent them off the only way they know how, in a casket. Then we'll follow that up with a retelling of the first ever goalkeeper goal in MLS history from Red Bull's own Danny Cepero. I'm Andrew, that's Connor, and this is MLS History Retold. And Connor's going to hit us with the cool music. And I'm going to say, "What's up, Connor? How you doing?"
What a missed opportunity to say what's up, brother. Wow, how dare you? You want to restart that?
No, I don't.
I have some bad news for you today.
What's that?
Uh, I do not have any Red Bull references in my story.
I'll get some in there. Don't you worry.
If you could find a way to get some Red Bull references in there, I would be heavily impressed. But you have to wait to the end of my story to chime in.
I've got lots of Red Bull references in mine. Funny enough.
Oh wow, shocker! The story about Red Bull, you have Red Bull references?
I know it's crazy,
Crazy.
isn't it? Isn't it wild? I
I
think you're.
know.
I've told you this off air, but I think the goal was whatever, but the lead up and kind of all of this stuff surrounding it and the meaning behind it is stuff I didn't even know about until I dove into it. So I think you're gonna like it.
Yeah, I'll be the judge of that.
All right. Well, before we go in and tell our stories, we should always go to Scarf of the Week. What are you rocking today?
Yes, so I know this is supposed to kind of be focused on Portland, but I don't have a Portland scarf, not yet, at least. So I will be bringing out the scarf for the other team involved in this story, and that will be the Seattle Sounders.
I like that. Show that. Pull that up again.
You want to see the Yeti or the Bigfoot?
Yeah, that's what that was. I forgot it was a Yeti. I was like, "What do you got there?" That's the one you got when you were at the game, right?
Yeah, this is from
Yeah,
Lumen Field.
yeah, I like that, man. That's good. I'm getting plans together for a Charlotte and an Atlanta away day, so I'm excited for some new scarves in that realm.
I'll have to Venmo you to pick me up a scarf from Atlanta. Actually, maybe I should wait and get a scarf in person myself at
Yeah,
Atlanta.
yeah, we could definitely do that. We'll find something cool. I again still haven't really organized my scarf closet yet, but I am rocking just a good old Red Bull scarf. It meets in the front, so bonus points. But this is just bang average. It's nothing special.
Kind of like
But this
Rebel.
this story is special. So I wish I found one that's a little more special. But I feel like we probably before we dive into this should give a shout out to a former host of the pod for a very big occasion in his life, getting engaged this morning afternoon. He's in Iceland, so I don't know what time it is over there, but he posted he got engaged. So congrats, Adam, to you, and all the happiness to you and
And
Sabrina.
Sabrina.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just getting there,
Okay,
and
just making sure.
Sabrina to a very long life of happiness. So we'll clip that and send it to you. But that's our joint podcast story. But now it's time to get into some MLS stories, and I believe we're tossing it to Connor first.
Yes, we absolutely are. And I am here to tell you and everybody listening the story of Sammy the Sounder's casket. So, as always, sources for this episode, there is a wonderful YouTube video by Alexander E. Tennant called Portland Timbers Army Coffin Saga, about a 5-minute video. If you really want to learn about this incident and see live video of everything that led up to it and everything that I'm talking about, definitely check it out. Highly recommend it. Also, was able to take some info from an article called "What is a Seattle Freakin' Sounder? The Origins of MLS Cup Finalists Nickname" by Ari Lillenwall. Hopefully, I didn't mispronounce that. Of MLS soccer, and then Wikipedia, of course. All right, so there's going to be a lot of history within the history of this episode, because with no context for any fans outside of Portland and Seattle fan bases, fans carrying a casket with an inflatable whale into the stadium sounds like one of the most ridiculous, confusing stories. So let's start with the groundwork, the rivalry between Seattle and Portland. And I'm going to keep this relatively high level. The history begins all the way back in the 70s and 80s with both sides participating in NASL. The rivalry, like many other rivalries, has been sparked by the proximity between the two cities. With that said, however, I believe that soccer is the last remaining current day sports rivalry between the two cities. After the end of the NASL era, there was a hiatus for over a decade before the rivalry was reborn again in the A League in 2001. Their A-League battles would last for 4 seasons, ending in 2004 with a playoff battle between the two sides that would see Seattle getting the better of Portland in extra time. Following 2004, the rivalry would continue under the newly named USL First Division. To this point, Seattle had the slight edge in the head-to-head results with 11 wins to Portland's 8. Along with the beginning of the USL First Division was the first meeting in the US Open Cup, now adding another competition to this rivalry's history. The start of the USL era was strong for Portland as they won 3 of the first 4 meetings, including the inaugural US Open Cup matchup. Seattle would bounce back in the coming years to solidify relatively significant head-to-head advantage over Portland with 20 wins to Portland's 13. The USL era rivalry between the two sides would end in 2008, with Seattle making their move to MLS in 2009. As Portland was lined up to also join MLS soon after Seattle's move, there were still many more rivalry matchups to look forward to. However, at the time, nobody knew for sure, which meant the match we're talking about today could be the last between this historic rivalry. That brings us to the USL match on August 7th, 2008 at PGE Park between Portland and Seattle. So as previously mentioned, with Seattle's move to MLS, fans were unsure if this would be the last match between the two sides. So Portland's fans, specifically the Portland Timbers Army, wanted to do something memorable in case it was the last meeting. In the YouTube video mentioned at the start, there's an interview with a member of the Timbers Army who tells the story of the Casket. He starts off by talking about the recreational league team that the Timbers Army is a part of. And while they were practicing one day, they heard a scraping sound coming from nearby. When they looked in the direction of the sound, they found that the sound was actually coming from some people dragging a casket to the curb. What a perfect opportunity to represent the potential death of the Timbers Sounders rivalry than with a casket. He says that a couple members of the Timbers Army ran over to the casket, which said, "Free casket, no body inside." So with the opportunity sitting right in front of them, they loaded the casket into someone's pickup truck, and the preparations were on their way. On August 7th, the casket was brought to a pub near the stadium, where people signed the casket and a candle vigil was performed. As the title of the story says, the casket was not empty. The Timbers Army had blown up an inflatable whale to put in the casket as a representation of Sammy the Sounder. All right, time for brief history lesson number 2. For those outside of Portland or Seattle, you may have no idea who Sammy the Sounder is and why an inflatable whale was used to represent them. The Sounders part of the name comes from the nearby Puget Sound. One of the animals that is a part of the marine life in the Puget Sound is the orca, or killer whale. This was the reason that the Sounders mascot during their USL days became an orca named Sammy, hence the birth of Sammy the Sounder. The Timbers Army represented the potential death of the rivalry by placing an inflatable whale in the casket to reference Sammy the Sounder and by and large, the Seattle Sounders. Second brief history lesson done, let's get back to the funeral. A funeral indeed was, as when it was getting time to head to the stadium, the Timbers Army carried the casket from the pub to the stadium with bagpipes being played along the march. This would never happen nowadays, but when the Timbers Army reached the stadium, they hoisted the casket over the fence to further members on the other side to successfully bring the casket into the stadium. Security eventually appears to finally usher the casket out of the stadium, but that's not before a Reddit post by Sean Levy many years later. Remembering the events shows a picture of the casket being crowd surfed to the capo stand in the north end. The Sounders would get the last laugh in this one, as Sebastian Latu's 20th minute goal gave the Sounders a 1-0 win. Luckily for Portland fans, and quite frankly, luckily for us MLS fans as well, this was not the death of the rivalry, as Portland would join MLS not long after Seattle, which has treated us to many more renditions of this great rivalry.
Is one of my favorite stories that I learned back when I was kind of breaking down that MLS lore iceberg thing I sent you way back before we started this. And I read it and I was like, okay, it's got to be something Seattle related, but it goes far, far above anything I could have ever imagined it would be. It is peak. I mean, that is supporter culture in a nutshell, and that is one of the reasons why that Portland Seattle rivalry is, one of the best. Maybe third, fourth,
Third. Oh, are you trying to get your Red Bull reference in here?
Probably Red Bull New York City, Red Bull DC, Red Bull Atlanta. Well, not really. Atlanta has to beat us in the probably not Red Bull Atlanta. Um,
Red Bull New England,
Red Bull versus the world.
Red Bull
You know,
Philly.
Red Bull, Red Bull Philly. They want us to be rivals so bad. There you go. There's your Red Bull reference. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, no, just their supporter culture goes crazy over there because it's
both of
the
them, both
only.
sides go crazy.
Oh yeah, and because it's one of the only, it's the longest lasting, right? And we talk about, oh, why don't we have such deep rooted supporter culture? Well, because most teams started 10 to 15 years ago, right? But Seattle, Portland have been doing this for half a century now, probably longer, right?
Mhm.
That is why I have no doubt in my mind that we will get to a point where that is commonplace all over. Just a couple more decades, unfortunately, but that's the way we got to do it. That's the way we're building it up. That's okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, both these are two of the best fan bases in all of MLS.
Oh,
Constantly
easy.
have insanely good crowds, and it makes the rivalry so much better. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully, I would agree with you that I think that's the way it's probably going to shift, and it's like eventually we're going to consistently get supporters groups like this and crowds. But I think the one trade off, the bad thing I would say about the game growing so much and getting bigger crowds is I don't think you get to see like some of this crazy like smaller stuff happen anymore. Like there's no chance that they're carrying a casket into the stadium to like represent the death of like their rivalry with their other team. Like nobody's getting away with that nowadays, unfortunately. So I'm sure we'll find new stories and things like that. Like of course we still see stories all the time. We talk about it in the group chat, but like I feel like there's certain ones like this that you're just not going to be able to see anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a totally fair point. And one of those things that there is that argument that's been going on about like, oh, what should MLS allow and what shouldn't they allow? Flares and tifos and flags and whatever. You know, that always is going to be what determines how far we can take it. Comparative to Argentina and Brazil and like those kind of crazy places. But at the end of the day, I don't think that you're at all seeing a decrease. I mean, I grafted out a couple months ago just because I was bored. I had nothing else to do in my apartment waiting for things to show up. And I think outside of the COVID years, we've had increases in not both average and like team over team year over year for like half a decade now. And you see it in the way that these fans are showing up and truly supporting the group, not just, oh, I'm showing up for a day out, right? Like it is a really nice thing to see, and I'm really excited to see where it goes from here.
Yeah,
Now,
and I'm excited to see where you go with your story.
see, I was about to go transition to say, hey, it took a while. It's going to take a while for MLS to see more rivalries like that, but they're okay with waiting because they had to wait over 2 decades to see a goalkeeper goal in their league.
Nice. Good
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah, better than I wonder where you're going to go with it. Because listen, everybody loves a good goalkeeper goal, right? And if you ask any goalkeeper in the world, speaking as one, they will tell you that they are actually the world's greatest number nine. Kylian Mbappe can hold this, and nobody finishes off chances like a goalkeeper could. But you just wouldn't know because we don't get the chance, right? We're always in that other box. We don't get a chance to score goals, right? However, in this beautiful, wonderful game, sometimes that chance does come knocking, and you can think back to some of the most memorable goalkeeper goals over the years, right? Goalkeepers coming up and scoring off of corners like Brad Friedel, goals scored off of freak bounces and crazy wind like the GOAT, Tim Howard. Or you had some goalkeepers who were actually goal scoring machines like Brazilian goalkeeper Rogério Ceni, who was Sao Paulo's set piece taker and finished his career with 87 goals in Brazil. While it happens often around the world, maybe not often, but it's happened more memorably around the world, this took a while to happen in MLS. As a budding lead, they had to wait over a decade to see their first goal scored by a goalkeeper, and it came on the turf of Giant Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. In October 2008, the Columbus Crew would travel south to take on the New York Red Bulls for an end of the season clash that had massive meaning for both sides, both for the Columbus Crew's supporter shield hopes and for the New York Red Bulls playoff hopes. At the time, MLS was using the wild card playoff system, meaning that there were 6 playoff teams that were awarded to the top 3 in each conference, and then the next best 2 teams, regardless of their conference, would get in. With the 2 games left to play in the season up to this point, both wild card spots were up to grab by every team not in a top 6 position. Red Bull with 36 points at the time needed one win and some help, or 2 wins to definitely secure their place in the playoffs, at least in the wild card spots. However, their last 2 matches being against top of the table Columbus and third place Chicago would make it no easy feat. And that was especially true when you considered the massive change in personnel that they needed to contend with for these last 2 games. Usually the first choice goalkeeper was John Conway, but he, along with Jeff Park, was suspended for this game and for the next 9 games following for a performance-enhancing drug scandal that they were a part of, which is probably a whole nother story we need to dive into because that was something I was not expecting. But this meant that it was time for goalkeeper 2. Now on the bench, you had this goalkeeper guy, Zach Thornton. I don't know. Some people know him as a guy who's kind of good at playing in goal. But instead, the head coach, Juan Carlos Osorio, opted for a 23-year-old Danny Cepero in net. Not only was this 23-year-old going in, he was going in for his first ever start against the soon-to-be Supporters Shield champions. What could go wrong, right? Danny Cepero, Long Island born and raised, had started in the Red Bull Academy system, or what would have been the Academy system at the time, before earning a loan move to the Harrisburg City Islanders. He's shown in his time there so much so that he was recalled to Red Bull to be a part of their goalkeeper room. And apparently he was so impressive in training that within moments of their recall, he earned the starting spot. He was going up against the Columbus Crew, who had a front line of this guy, Pat Noonan, who was pretty good on his day in New England, Stevie Lenhart, Mr. Goonies Go Wild himself, and this designated player, Guillermo Barros Schelotto, if anybody's ever heard of him, just this kind of really good Argentinian attacker. Quite the test ahead of him, but it was made easier when Red Bull put the first chance of the match off the post just 17 seconds into the game. The rest of the half was dominated by Red Bull, and Cepero really wasn't called into action until a corner kick in the dying seconds of the half. The ball swung in, found the head of former Chicago Fire boss Ezra Hendrickson, whose effort was athletically tipped past the post by a diving Cepero. First save in MLS? Check. In the ensuing corner, he came, punched it clear, and the halftime whistle went. Good, solid, commanding goalkeeping from the rookie to enter the halftime break. Coming straight out of the half, Red Bull did not take their foot off the gas and took the lead through Juan Pablo Angel. Shortly after, Danny Cepero would concede the first goal of his MLS career after a perfectly placed Guillermo Barros Schelotto's free kick landed on the head of Steven Lenhart, who nodded it home to level the score. It was at this moment you felt the energy of Giant Stadium get sucked out like a vacuum, because everybody in the stands knew that without 3 points, playoffs were basically done and dusted. And that was until 10 minutes later when a hopeful ball found the feet of Juan Pablo Angel, who volleyed it home and gave Red Bull the lead once more. It was at this point, with 15 minutes left, that the New York Red Bulls knew they needed another goal, and they could put this one to bed and be over. However, I don't think anybody thought it would come from this passage of play. In the 83rd minute, with the ball marked nicely on the 24-yard line of Giant Stadium's American football pitch, Danny Cepero launched one forward to clear the lines. He was quoted as saying, "I just hit it up there somewhere where my teammates could do something with it." However, not all of his teammates were happy with the ball that he played, as it sailed 10 yards past any Red Bull player in the field of play. Andrew Boyens, Red Bull defender, said that his first reaction was, "What the hell are you kicking that to?" He was actually pretty disappointed because it was going straight down the middle. And Boyens wasn't wrong. If you watched the video back, it looked like this was just another ball that was headed for the hands of the opposing goalkeeper, and they were trying to preserve a crucial lead in the playoff race. They were just giving away possession. But as the frames tick on, you see Columbus goalkeeper Andy Greenenbaum slowly creep forward out of his 6-yard box up to the PK dot, and something looks off. The positioning of the goalkeeper based on the flight of the ball just isn't quite right. Something looked wrong, and there was something wrong. As the ball struck the ground, it flew up and over Greenenbaum's outstretched arms as he's retreating back into his goal, off his fingertips and into the net. The team rushed over to a very shocked and really confused Danny Cepero to celebrate. And it actually makes sense he was confused because according to Cepero, he didn't even know it went in. He had to ask Kevin Goldswaith if the ball went in and if he gets credit for it. The game would continue on with Red Bull still needing to see out the game to keep their playoff hopes alive. Danny played his part, making one final diving save in the 90th minute to keep the 2-goal lead. Red Bull would go on to see the game out 3-1 and finish the day in possession of the first wildcard spot. Though they would go on to lose the last match of the season, they did get a ton of help with Colorado and Dallas drawing their games and DC United losing, meaning that they would make the playoffs as the second wildcard spot in 2008. And if you don't know what happens from there, I suggest you subscribe and stick around because we will be telling that story very, very soon. Danny Cepero had a dream start to his rookie debut, one that you couldn't even write. However, in true Red Bull ways, Danny Cepero would not be around for long. After an impressive end to the 2008 season, he played in 13 more matches in the dreadful 2009 year. He won 2 of those games, drawed 3 of them, and lost 9 times, conceding 21 goals. He was let go at the end of the year, but for a brief moment, he gave Red Bull hope that they hadn't felt in quite some time. Thanks to some performance-enhancing drugs, a bold coach, and a goalkeeper goal from over 80 yards away, from Red Bull land to you, thank you, Danny Cepero, for just a little bit of hope in 2008.
MLS will never be a serious league as long as they're making goalkeeper blunders like this. I'm sorry, but my Premier League could never.
That's big facts, honestly.
That's a good story. And that's one that I feel like outside of Red Bull world, I don't think people are going to remember that. Even though it's like obviously goalkeeper goals are rare. Like I just don't think people outside of Red Bull world are going to know about that story.
I think a ton of people know about the goal. I don't think, because even I didn't know about the meaning behind it, where we were, where it was in the season, where we were in the table, how he got into that position in the first place. Like there was so much more behind it that I had no idea went on to it. And again, we know what happens. If you don't know what happens in 2008, stick around. But most of us know what happens in 2008. And to think that we got to where we got to in 2008 because of just this crazy combination of events like that, it's one of those things that I'm very happy we got to share on this series, because again, we all can look at the goal and be like, oh yeah, he scored from 80 yards out, whatever, but it had a lot of meaning behind it that I didn't even know about.
Well, now all the people know because it's retold.
And that is what this series is all about, making sure that everybody knows what's good in MLS history. Well, that'll do it for us, guys. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We love our MLS history series. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. When our next one goes live, if I remember correctly, we might be having a guest for our next history episode. Is that right?
You tell me.
I think we can probably wrap some things together and talk about. Yeah, we can wrap some things together and go to the. Yeah, we can set up a guest, our first ever history guest, I believe. Very, very exciting. Well, make sure you are subscribed for that because it will be a very, very fun episode. And then make sure you're following us wherever you get your podcasts. The next time we go live. I already said that. Make sure you're following us on all forms of social media so we post our clips. We love interacting with you guys on there. We just hit 400 on TikTok because we're massive. But we also are 13 subs away on YouTube. If I double check here really quick. 14, miscounted. 14 subs on YouTube to get to 500. So make sure you're following us over there so you can get all of our clips and stuff like that. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.